Hey guys, and welcome back to another week of the Green Dragon Podcast. I'm your host, Aiden.
Fellow host Tom.
And your fellow host Jake.
Well, guys, we're back another week. The world hasn't been blown to oblivion yet, um, even though Putin says he's gonna take out everybody. Um, and we're still here. We weren't blown away by the hurricane, uh, but our thoughts and prayers go out to all those who were affected by the Hurricane Ian. It was very devastating in Florida. I'm here in Atlanta, so we just got a bit of wind and rain. And you guys, one, well, Tom, you're clear of it, out in Wyoming, and Jake, you're all right there up in Illinois. But I know a lot of people that I know have family down in Florida that either have a second home there or live down there year round. And hurricane season's always devastating, but this one in particular really took a toll, especially in the Naples Fort Myers area. I heard it was especially bad. So uh, if you're if you're dealing with the effects of the hurricane, our thoughts and prayers go out to you um, over these next couple of weeks as you try to recover. Today we're gonna talk about the Fifth Amendment, kind of moving forward. I always like this one because I always think if I'd plead the Fifth. Um, I know our uh, President Trump, he formally made fun of a lot of people for pleading the Fifth. I don't know if you guys remember that over his 4 years and even before his 4 years when he was running, but he would always be like, "Well, pleading the Fifth makes you guilty." Uh, but it is important. It's there's a reason we do have it, and I think I guess I hadn't really thought about it too much until today, and then I was thinking about why we have it, and um, and so yeah, we'll talk a little bit about that today. I think it is something that's important to understand why we do have it and the importance of it, and kind of the limitations it does set in place for us as citizens. But I think first we should get started and talk a little bit about current news. I think we should start with domestic news because as I was going through the news this week, I was like, I really should split this up as I find news, whether it's domestic or more world news, and split that up a little bit. So I think we'll start with our domestic news stories. There was kind of some big ones that came through this week. Actually, one of the ones got me really excited. Last week we talked about the pistol ban from the ATF that would ban all pistol braces, but the state of Tennessee, recognizing their rights as a state and representing their citizens' rights, decided to give a big middle finger to the ATF and say, well, if you're going to ban pistol braces, then we're going to ban your stupid SBR law and tax stamp, and we're going to say that's unconstitutional. So they went ahead and did that. So congrats to Tennessee. That's awesome. Now I kind of wish I lived in Tennessee. It's making me consider moving 2 hours north to like Chattanooga or something. But that was pretty awesome. So I saw that in the news. I'm sure there'll be more to come on that. It's in the courts right now. It sounds like it's going through with no problem through state legislature. So it'd be very interesting to see then if that does go through. I would say the biggest implications for it would be the precedent it sets for other states doing this something similar. So it'd be interesting to see if Texas maybe follows suit. So that was great to see. Great news for Second Amendment. In similar news for the Second Amendment, uh, our Vice President Kamala Harris, in a recent speech, said that assault weapons, or she first started out the speech. I should preface this. She started out the speech by saying all things are designed for a purpose, and then she said that we need an assault weapons ban because assault weapons are designed, and this is a quote, are designed to kill a lot of human beings quickly. And then she went on to say, and that has no place in the streets of a civil society. And she followed that all up with, this was the real kicker. This is the thing that got me heated. She said, then she went on to say that she supports the Second Amendment. So I was like, there's so much like to contradict there. I mean, it just really fired me up because it was like, first of all, there's, I mean, we can unpack this a little bit, and I can't wait for you guys to weigh in on this because it really made me chuckle. Um, she first starts with this statement that assault weapons are designed to kill a lot of human beings quickly. And this, she was saying, essentially is their sole purpose. So if these so-called assault weapons are used or are designed primarily for the purpose to kill a lot of human beings quickly, then why are they used by police? Why are they used by the Secret Service? Why are they used by the FBI, the CIA, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? So, if they're only used and designed to kill a lot of human beings quickly, then there's a lot of explaining to do on the police's end and on the Secret Service's end and on the FBI's end. You know what I mean? So that made me chuckle a little bit. Because the answer is no, they're not designed to kill a lot of people quickly. Um, to claim that their sole purpose, assault weapons, as they're again called, she's calling them, that their sole purpose is to kill a lot of people quickly is just asinine. Um, because these weapons are designed to be able to protect and defend yourself effectively. That's why the military uses them. That's why the police uses them. That's why the Secret Service uses them. So to say that we, the people, can't have them to protect and defend ourselves completely negates the whole reason and purpose behind the Second Amendment. So then to go on and say you support the Second Amendment, but you don't support the most commonly used and owned firearm in America is just insane. And then the real kicker is if the police gets them, if the Secret Service gets them, and not to mention all criminals for the most part have them, and then to say we the people can't have them, then you're taking away our ability to protect ourselves effectively because they're a common use weapon. So it was just a whole thing. I listened to it and I just sat there for the whole 2 minutes and shook my head and kind of had 2 minutes of just absolute cringe. I mean, it was it was cringy to watch, and it's her too. So not not to be a downer or anything, but we have a pretty poor public speaking vice president. She's a like listen to nails on a chalkboard sometimes.
Hmm. Well put. Uh, yeah, every time I hear what something that she says, I put my hand on my forehead and just can't believe I'm hearing what I'm hearing.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know where she comes up with these ideas and where she comes up with how to phrase them, but it's definitely unique, to say the least.
I'll say this: if she is repeating anything, if everything she's repeating is from a writer, they need to fire that writer immediately. I mean, whoever that writer is, I'm not trying to be mean, but they're bad. But I have a feeling she's like saying this all on her own, and that writer is just sitting there like, you should have listened to me.
It's like, no, don't go there. Oh, she went there. Oh no.
Yeah, it just makes me kind of like bang my head into a wall because I know that like as vice president, you're just as much on a pedestal as the president as far as your who's viewing you on a global level, and to see just how sad our current administration has handled their public appearance from a leadership standpoint and from a public speaking standpoint. I mean, not to go into the weeds here, but Biden looks like he's once after he leaves. I saw JP Sears did a funny little video today, and he was pretending to interview Biden, and he asked him, "Why do you always look lost when you get off the get done like public speaking?" And he's like, "I don't know, man," or something like that. That's what he had Biden say on the video, and it was great because Biden will get done speaking, and it literally looks like he's looking for like somebody to come hold his hand and take him off there. He looks lost, and it's embarrassing. And I think to myself, I'm like, with China and Russia and every other country looking at us right now to see what we're going to do and what we're going to say and how we're going to handle certain situations that are going on in the world, when you've got two people up there that really I don't think know where they're at or know how, at least know how to act while they're up there, it's kind of sad and disappointing from a leadership standpoint.
Especially
Yeah.
since, yeah, like comparing it to our forefathers' writings and their eloquence in speech, like they were like the best at what they did.
Exactly. Yeah, they were
And
incredible.
then,
And
like, if you listen to Trump's speeches, he's really, really well said in what he wants to
mm-hmm,
say.
mm-hmm.
And he said that before, that he spends a lot of time preparing for his speeches and making sure he says what he means.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah, or if you go listen to Reagan um, or even, I mean, the Gettysburg. You read the Gettysburg Address, and you're like, holy cow! Could you imagine if somebody, you know, wrote that today or got up there and said something like that today?
mm.
It'd it'd be nice. It'd be nice if somebody could pick up the torch and be a leader, but I'm not seeing that right now. Um, so yeah, that was disappointing to see in the news. Uh, we've got both our president and vice president pretty much trashing all over the Second Amendment while saying they support it. So just be aware of that as you're going into this election season. Um, that a lot of politicians will say they support the Second Amendment, but you really need to look at their policy because oftentimes the most egregious attackers of the Second Amendment are the ones that say, "Oh, I support the Second Amendment." Across the board. I mean, it seems like every political commercial I've seen, they're like, "Oh, I'm a Second Amendment supporter," but we need to ban guns. So I don't understand how those two things go hand in hand. So it's just something to be aware of. With elections coming up this fall, it's important to know who's running for Senate and the House. I mean, it's every vote counts when it comes to our freedoms being upheld. And one last little side note or note on some Second Amendment news. The families of the Highland Park, Illinois shooting are actually suing Smith and Wesson because the shooter used um, a Smith and Wesson rifle to commit the egregious act there. This follows on the heels of the Uvalde, Texas families suing Daniel Defense because a Daniel Defense weapon was used. And it just made me think this is something I'm hearing more and more recently with a lot of these horrible mass shootings or crimes being committed. A lot of the victims' families are suing the actual manufacturer of the firearm, which seems insane to me. This is something that's pushed by especially the politicians that are anti 2A, um, because it's a way for them to attack the firearms industry, attack the industry that supports the Second Amendment. Because oftentimes these businesses are literally sued into oblivion. And if you look at this situation, I mean, it's a horrible thing that happened and nobody's denying that, but it's not the manufacturer's fault. If somebody takes a car they take their Mercedes van and they drive it through a crowd of people and kill 30 people, Mercedes isn't going to get sued for that. It's the person using that tool or using that object to commit a horrific crime. It's not it's not the manufacturer of the item. And so the same should be true for, guns. You shouldn't be able to sue a manufacturer because somebody committed a horrible crime with it. And so that was just something that popped up that it's really frustrating to see on the tail end of a tragedy like that, um, to have people, I guess, kind of falling into that trap and misusing. I don't know what you guys think. It's for me, it's frustrating to see people fall into this because it seems like a very politicized trap that people are kind of being either forced into or falling into.
Yeah, no, politicizes definitely the right word to use, and it is very sad to see how shamelessly these politicians and media pundits will play upon the emotions of these families who are obviously hurting after what happened. And in a time like that, it is easy to give an emotional reaction and assign blame to something that maybe is not exactly the cause of the tragedy. But having said that, it's just a very very striking example of how willing they are to exploit the emotions of these families.
Yeah, and I think the unfortunate thing is after it's all said and done, I can't imagine kind of the feeling that these families have that they're like a political puppet for the powers that be. And just the fact that you have these politicians that the day after some tragedy like this come out and say, I remember the Uvalde shooting earlier this year. Like literally the day of, people were coming out and say we need to ban assault weapons. I'm just like, is this like has have people become completely desensitized that this is something extremely tragic and we should be not worried about our political agendas, but maybe being present and saying words that console the families of the people that died here. It was just like Biden getting on the other day because yesterday was the anniversary of the shooting in Las Vegas. And he got on, and the first thing he was like, "We need to ban assault weapons." And I was like, "Jeez," I was like, "That's so it's so shameless how bad like they are, and they don't even try to hide it anymore, and it's just disgusting. It really is because not only are you attacking the rights of your citizens, but you're also taking away from the tragedy that happened. If people got up on 9/11 and were like, I don't know, I that's a bad example. But my point is that you taking a tragedy, they don't let a tragedy go to waste, and they utilize every opportunity they can to promote their agenda, and it's just disgusting. So I figured I'd bring that up really quick. I don't have much more to say on that. It was kind of sad to see. But then moving on, guys. This was another funny one, and then we'll go from this and we'll move on to some world news. But this is the last one for the U.S. kind of domestic news. Our good old Gavin Newsom, governor of California, decided today that he was going to blame oil and gas companies after California gas taxes nearly or double the national average. So the national average currently is $3.80 a gallon. Long Beach through LA area right now sits at about $6.46. So Mr. Newsom got up there and started blaming the oil and gas companies. But there was a lot of good points made, and one of these points was uh, that that this is the same state that decided what was it about 2 or 3 weeks ago that they were going to announce that they'd be banning um, all gas-powered vehicles, the production and sales of gas-powered vehicles by like 20, is it, am I think it was like 2030, or maybe it's sooner than that, but I think 2030 is kind of like the conservative guess that I think I heard.
Hmm.
So it just made me chuckle. I'm like, what did you think was going to happen? I was like, you announce that, and all of a sudden your gas prices go up. You know, the refineries, and this is the reason why the gas prices are going up. The refineries actually um, are going to have issues um, because they, you know, have they have a staff, right? They have people to employ. And so you suddenly and when you start polling as a state, you start polling your backing on these oil and gas as an industry, people are going to leave it. And so as soon as you say we're going to ban oil and gas by 2030, guess what? Your production of oil and gas in these refinery your production of gasoline in these refineries is going to go down the drain. It's going to tank and your prices are going to go up. And so I just thought it was hilarious. And of course the refineries have planned and unplanned maintenance on a lot of their machines. And so this was one of the main causes of, of the recent gas spikes. And I just find it hilarious that, you know, the governor who's supposed to handle all this stuff couldn't have enough sense to explain to the people what was going on. Be like, hey, listen, we'll try to get this back on track. Right now, there's been a lot of issues with the production. We'll try to fix this, but also we're moving towards this plan. And, like, if he's really set on this plan for 2030, then he better be like instilling some like confidence in the people. You know what I mean? Like, at least try. Don't be like, oh, it's not on me. It's not this game of like hot potato, like passing the blame is hilarious to watch with a lot of these governors because they absolutely have zero clue what goes into like these changes. I don't think if you ask Gavin Newsom like why the prices went up, he'd sit there and stumble and mutter for 10 minutes and he'd do what he did. He'd blame it on the oil and gas companies. Oh, they're just trying to price gouge us, blah 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 blah. It's so stupid to watch these politicians that are running our country that have zero clue because they're just a pretty face that likes the power and the money. It fired me up. I was like, oh my gosh. But what do you expect from California? You don't expect much more. It's a beautiful state. I won't say any more about the people. Great, 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 great people live in the state. Your governor and your politicians, they suck.
Yeah, I think
Absolute, absolute garbage. And there's a reason people are moving to Texas.
it's so true. Uh, Yeah, hopefully these things will help people start to understand basic economics again. Not that some people don't, but I think as a general theme, it seems like, and at least on the internet platforms, a lot of stuff is said that doesn't actually work, make sense, or correlate with reality.
Hmm.
So, but on the other hand, a lot of the people that are teaching those things are being viewed more now. So hopefully that
That's
happens
true.
more.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, yeah. But that kind of wraps it up for domestic news. We had quite a bit there, but just wait. We're rolling into world news, and the fun never ends. Um, I guess we'll start out with just bringing up that tensions continue to rise in Russia as threats increase for the use of nuclear weapons, especially on Ukraine. The I don't know if he's the prime minister president of Chechnya encouraged Vladimir Putin today to use low yield nuclear weapons on Ukraine because of their inability to win the war. Um, so that happened. Russia actually not only has threatened to use nukes to or nuclear weapons on Ukraine, but now they're beginning to say that if the U.S. continues to supply weapons to Ukraine, it would lead to a direct military action against NATO, which is the first time that Russia, Putin, and the Kremlin have actually threatened to use military action against a country other than Ukraine. So that's something that's slightly concerning. Along that vein of nuclear weapons, Russia's high-tech sub with nuclear weapons, they're calling them doomsday weapons in the news, went missing from its Arctic base. So that's deployed somewhere. So that's something to keep an eye on. That's also concerning because now they're actually, if they weren't already, they're deploying assets with the capability of launching and attacking using nuclear warfare. I think today the other big news point on as far as the nuclear weapons vein, actually the city of Kyiv in Ukraine has other evacuation centers. They've been issued potassium iodine pills in case of nuclear fallout. For those of you who don't know, potassium iodine works to help block absorption of harmful radiation in the thyroid gland, helps stop a lot of the effects of radiation if there was to be a nuclear attack. So we'll see. I mean, but people are real. I mean, this is at first it was kind of like nobody. I don't. I think when Putin first said it, people were like, oh, "Yeah, whatever. He's not going to use nuclear weapons." But as the weeks have gone on, this and the more desperate he becomes, the threat of nuclear weapons is being used is probably the highest it's been since, for sure, since the Cold War. So I mean, this is I would say this is yeah, no joke. And I think if we don't play our cards right as a country, then it could get ugly because we're kind of leading NATO on, and with our current administration, I don't have as much faith in them as I would have Reagan during the Cold War. So it will be very interesting to see what the following weeks bring as far as uh, what position the White House takes, what position our Secretary of Defense, everything so far has been essentially, we recognize the threat that Russia poses. We will not go into anything. It's kind of just BS. Because I don't know if they really even have a plan. I'm sure they've got something, but it doesn't really seem like they're doing much right now, which is slightly concerning. Um, so yeah, that's the situation in Russia and Ukraine. Oh, yeah, in Russia, I think I said in the last podcast they enacted a draft, or Putin enacted a draft. They already have 200,000 Russian men being trained and ready to mobilize from that draft. So he's really ramping up his army, trying to do everything he can to push for Ukraine. And the scary thing is, I think, is that the more we back Ukraine, the longer this thing goes on. He's not going to stop until it's all said and done. And at this point, I don't put it past him to use any unnecessary force to take Ukraine. He's not going to stop until he gets it. So, how this ends, who knows? I know there's people talking about an assassination attempt we'll see. We'll keep an eye on it. We'll keep you guys updated. In other world news, I guess this is also along the lines of Russia. I forgot about this, but it involves China, Brazil, and India. China, Brazil, and India, along with Russia, abstained from the UN Security Council vote to condemn Russia's annexation of the 4 regions of Ukraine. This just leads us to kind of get a sense of where these countries' alliances lie. I had a sense for a while that India was in with China and Russia, but this kind of just seals the deal. You throw Brazil in there too. So I think if you were gonna see Russia take military action against UN, you'd probably see China, Brazil, and India back it. And you probably see North Korea in the mix too. With those 4, just because North Korea seems like they'd want to get in on some of the money. They'd probably be Kim Jong would probably be supplying everybody with his nukes that he's been sitting on, or telling everybody he's been sitting on for years. So, yeah, that's interesting to see. I didn't. I knew about India, but I didn't quite know about Brazil. So it'll be interesting as things progress if anybody else joins the ranks. But currently, that's kind of I would say the resistance against the West is how I would put it. And I think if Russia does take action against the UN, this would likely be World War III, and you'd see these powers work together. So, something to also keep an eye on moving forward, to see if those alliances strengthen or if anybody joins those alliances. And then lastly, this is just something that I thought was insane, extremely sad. There was a riot at an Indonesian soccer match, and it led to 129 killed, from my understanding, and 180 injured and in the hospital, which is just absolutely like shocking. I mean, that is truly devastating. Most were said to have either died from suffocation or being trampled. But I watched Real News No Bullshit had a video from somebody that was in the stands that night, and I mean there was a lot of police brutality going on too. They were drop kicking people, and they had like sticks, and they were beating people in the stadium. So it made me just wonder. It just kind of shows the state of the world right now. There's been riots and all sorts of crazy stuff going on. I think Iran had some riots this week and attacks, and it just shows you where we're at a soccer game. A riot can break out, and you can see this type of devastation nowadays. So, yeah, it was also just crazy to see. We hear about police brutality here in the U.S., but this was on a whole nother level. I mean, you had a stadium literally full of police beating, and I'm sure there was deaths as a result of the police brutality too, from what it looked like. So it was shocking to see, and yeah, kind of crazy. But our world's in I think, a crazy place, and those in power, especially those in lower positions of power, sometimes act out because they feel like they're better. And so in this case, I think with the police brutality, there was kind of a reflection of that, kind of this grab for power and putting other people beneath them. And that's, I feel like, where we're kind of at as a society, whether it's situations like that or just um, on social media. I think there's kind of this, there's not really a feeling of togetherness anymore. It's this individualistic power grab. So it's just something I was thinking about after I read that. I was like, oh, geez, like if this can happen there, it can happen anywhere. And really, the only way to fix this is for a complete societal shift. And I think that's something that I don't know if we'll see it in our lifetime. It takes something pretty serious to change that mindset.
Yeah. I think we've even we have a recent example, not exactly comparable to the 129 killed at the soccer match, but we had that Travis Scott concert last year
Mm-hmm.
where I'm forgetting how many people it was. I want to say
It was pretty
15 to
significant.
20 maybe.
I mean, yeah, it was pretty
Um,
significant.
but yeah, like you said though, if you mentioned if it could happen there, it could happen here. And I think we're
Mm-hmm.
already kind of seeing that. I don't
Mm-hmm.
know, just kind of that propensity for mass hysteria, whether
Mm.
it's physical in that sense or emotional in the social media sense.
Yeah,
It's a little disturbing to see things escalating out of control like that.
yeah. I think the scariest thing for me is the disregard for each other and the the importance of the importance of human life and a lot and the respect for human life is like we just I think as a society have gotten to a point where we don't respect one another to the point where we don't respect another person's life at all to the point where we can just completely disregard people. And I mean, like, I think to that Travis Scott concert that you mentioned, to be in that concert and to see somebody literally, dying because they can't breathe or they're being trampled and to not do anything is you the lowest a human person can ever act, in my opinion. To just watch somebody die and not do anything about it is just absolutely despicable and disgusting. And to be able to do something about it, or to be that engrossed in whatever you're doing, whether it's a concert or going crazy at a soccer game and rioting and completely disregarding other people's lives to the point where you in a whether you killed them or not, you were part of the reason that they died. It's just I think it's very telling of a society, and if we continue down that path, we won't be around much longer as a as a as a whole.
Yeah.
So
And when we live in a society nowadays that is so big on self-care, self-help, self, you name it. um, it's I mean, don't get me wrong, you gotta take care of yourself. You've got to ensure that you're living the healthiest life possible. But I think we've taken it to the level where it comes at the expense of regarding others as well.
hmm yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, we become so self-centered that we I think we've just completely forgotten about others. We're just a selfish society, I think, and that's probably one of the biggest problems. If everybody was a little bit nicer, maybe that's something, you know, each of us could, I know I could work on it, but just making sure that you're more aware of how you're treating others is, if everybody did that, just one little thing every day, we'd be a lot better off. Because at the very least, you're thinking about it, which means you're probably not going to do the things that hurt other people. So yeah, it was just I read that and I was like, oh man, uh, and in the situations that we're facing today, whether it's Russia and Ukraine or China and Taiwan or the stuff that's going on domestically, the more I see that, the more I realize it's not just a US problem, it's not just a problem in Russia, it's not just a problem in China. We're as a society as a whole, we're falling apart. And there's a reason for that. And I think there's a lot of reasons for it. But just looking at that one example, it made me realize how little I think we care about one another. And if we cared a little bit more, we'd probably be a lot better off.
You know, that reminds me, I was listening to this interview or conversation with Shia LaBeouf and John Bernthal. I don't forget his last name, but there's a podcast called The Real Ones, and so Shia was talking about his conversion story and pretty much the past 2 years and where God has put him and what he was trying to do to make amends for his life. And I was honestly blown away by how sincere and intentional he is to do good for people now. Like over and over again, he's like, every morning when I wake up, I'm just asking God, what can I do to serve and help other people? And he said it's so different because he said for the previous years of his life, he said he's always been thinking about what can he do to boost his ego. And he said that that was the worst thing he could ever do because he hurt so many people, in his words, own words. But it was really inspirational because he was talking about how messed up he was, but it was the people that showed him love that brought him out of it. And he said the first person that showed him love was his wife that he wasn't talking to for a couple of years, and she was the one to kind of pulled him out, and then a contract for doing Padre Pio, and then he asked him to go to a monastery and the brothers just took him in as one of their own. He said he's never had that before. And then when he came back to his wife, and then now they have a baby and they're starting their family, and it's just really interesting because somebody like Shia LaBeouf, who's considered like one of the best actors of our time, and him just coming out it and saying, I wasted so much thinking about myself, and I want to do so much to help others. I was like, that's gonna do some real good because it's people like that who say, I want something better, I want to follow what God has given us. I think that's what really starts to move the world in the right direction. Because if someone who has had it all that the world thinks is a good life, and he says, no, I wasn't really living life that well at all, that's going to at least get them to think like, oh, there is something more, there's more meaning, life is good. So I just wanted to share that because I was really inspired by just listening to him. Man, he has so much energy. It's crazy to listen to him. He's really smart too, but it was really neat. I felt like I got a new take on what it means to live a faith.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's it's something when you I think when you meet somebody that has that type of or you hear somebody, whatever it might be, when you encounter somebody that has a type of love and displays it, love for neighbor, I think it's something it really strikes you because it's something that we really don't see that often anymore. And I don't I think a lot of it has to do with less people being more religious, and whether or not you're religious or what religion you practice. I think everybody is called to love their neighbor. And I think that's the biggest thing that Christianity especially teaches is to love God and to love your neighbor as yourself. And the further and further we get away from that, the worse off we'll be, because then we become these self-centered, we make ourselves God, and we don't treat others with any sort of respect. So I think that's the beauty of, if you read the Bible, it's the beauty of the truth that the Bible holds, that we're called, every single one of us, no matter who we are, to love each other and treat each other as we want to be treated. So, yeah, I think that's perfect, Tom. That's really awesome. I might have to check that podcast out because that sounds really, really good. Well, that's all the current news I have. I don't know if you guys have anything to add to that, but if not, I'm ready to jump into our main topic for today, the Fifth Amendment. You guys ready?
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Awesome. So I was reading. I mean, I've heard people they always say in the movies, "I plead the fifth," blah 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 blah, whatever. But this was actually the first time I read through the whole thing, and I was like, "Oh, this makes a lot of sense." This is actually a lot longer than some of the ones we've read in previous weeks. I don't know if you guys took the time to look through it all, but this is like a full paragraph. They didn't skimp on this one. This is they they let you know where they stood on it. The founding fathers. So I think it just shows the importance of it though. And I think this one's often overlooked. Um, like I said earlier, even Trump kind of made fun of he gave the Fifth Amendment a little bit of a hard time during his presidency, and now it comes back to bite him in the ass a little bit because now he's pleading the Fifth, and we'll talk a little bit about that in a moment. But I think after kind of seeing it being played out in a couple different scenarios, I'm like, okay, I kind of understand why we have the Fifth Amendment, and it doesn't always protect innocent people. And I think that's one of the reasons it gets a lot of criticism. I do have an example, and we'll get into it in a second. O.J. Simpson. It protected O.J. Simpson. We all know O.J. did it. The glove didn't fit, but O.J. did it. And so I think it's interesting to see this process that's been set in place. It doesn't always um, protect innocent people, but it also does give the citizen the ability to protect themselves from false incrimination or being locked up for life or for serious cases um, with a little bit more. It gives them more protection. So I guess we could get right into it. I can go ahead and read, and maybe we'll just break it down a little bit because there is a lot here. So I'll go through and read. Maybe I'll read the full thing, and then we can break it down sentence by sentence, or kind of each clause by clause. Because, like I said, a lot to go over here. So, the Fifth Amendment: no person shall be held to answer for a capital or otherwise infamous crime, unless on presentment or indictment of a grand jury, except in cases arising in the land or naval forces, or in the militia, when in actual service in a time of war or public danger. Nor shall any person be subject for the same offense to be twice put in jeopardy of life or limb, nor shall be compelled in any criminal case to be a witness against himself, nor be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor shall private property be taken for public use without just compensation. So there we go. It has a lot in there. But I guess we could just start with maybe that first part. No person shall be held to answer for a capital or otherwise infamous crime unless on a presentment or indictment of a grand jury, except in cases arising in land or naval forces in the militia, when in actual service in time of war or public danger. So, this first part, at least the way I read it, just tells that, regardless of who you are, you're not to be held to answer, like it says, to answer for any capital or otherwise infamous crime. So no major crime, essentially, without the presentment or indictment of a grand jury. So you can't just be held for a serious crime that a grand jury hasn't indicted you for, which is pretty important because otherwise we could just go around locking people up for crimes they possibly didn't commit. And so I think this just is a good barrier, a good um, safeguard against the government kind of taking action it shouldn't, whether that's local or state or federal. And so I think having that barrier in place is important. Um, the next part says, "Nor shall any person be subject for the same offense twice, put in jeopardy of life or limb." This is kind of I think they call it the double jeopardy clause, and we see this played out in the O.J. Simpson case, where he was found not guilty in his trial, and because he was found not guilty, he couldn't actually be tried again for the crime. But he was actually the one kind of loophole there is that you can be sued in a civil court or civil case. So in this case, OJ was actually sued by the families affected in that murder that he was found not guilty for, but he was actually found guilty in the civil case, so he did have to pay up. He was found liable, I should say, not guilty, but he was found liable in the civil case, so he actually had to pay that to the families. So it is interesting, but I think the reason we have it is so that you can't just continuously try somebody over and over and over again until you get the result that you want, which I think is important because I feel like if this wasn't in place, we'd have a lot of cases, or like where a certain interest group really wanted somebody to be locked away, and then you just continuously have a trial, hopefully get a jury that stacks in your favor, you win the trial, and eventually you get this person locked up. So that stops that from happening, which I think is important because it probably would happen if this barrier wasn't in place. So I thought that was kind of interesting. The OJ case was the only example I thought of it. I don't know if you guys have any other examples of that. But the next part just says, "Nor shall be compelled in any criminal case to be a witness against himself." So this is kind of the line that leads to the famous phrase, "I plead the fifth." You in no way, shape, or form have to be a witness against yourself. You never have to say anything that could possibly help the prosecution. Um, and you never have to say anything that could lead to you essentially testifying against oneself, saying anything that could be incriminating. So this is why a lot of people, when asked questions, say, "I plead the fifth," when it's done by police, because really, at least from what I was reading, it's better just to say, "I plead the fifth," even if it makes you look guilty, so to speak, because anything that you say can be used against you in a courtroom. And so the less you say, the better. especially if you are guilty, the less you say, the better. But even if you aren't guilty, you should probably just plead the fifth, because You have to realize as a prosecution, the prosecution will use anything that you say against you. Anything that you say that could be construed in any way, they can use that against you. And you, as long as it leads to their case and is relevant, they can use that in a criminal case. And if the jury finds that to be enough evidence to, without a reasonable doubt, to convict you of your criminal offense, you're screwed. So it's better to just plead the fifth. And I think, in the news recently, Trump has pled the fifth during the New York Attorney General deposition. And he's gotten a lot of flack for this because in the past he's said, you know, all these people pleading, I think all these people pleading the fifth, they're just guilty, blah, blah, blah. He said it numerous times. And unfortunately, there's a lot of compilations out there full of him saying how only guilty people plead the fifth and blah, 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 blah. But I think no matter who you are, whether you're Trump, whether you're just average everyday person, and you get held up by the police for something, it's probably just better until you have a lawyer, plead the fifth. Lawyers are well versed in this stuff. They can take care of that. So it's better not to say anything because that can, and most of the time will be used against you in a court of law. So that's the I plead the fifth line. So kind of interesting to see a real life example of it, and I think it puts it in perspective because I was kind of under the impression most people that plead the fifth probably guilty, right? But it makes a lot of sense why we have it, because if you're in a legal system where you're innocent until proven guilty, the prosecution is going to use everything they can to make you look guilty. And that's the one, I would say that's the one big difference from our legal system compared to a lot of other countries. A lot of other countries, you're guilty and they have to prove you innocent. But in the US, you're innocent until proven guilty. And that's why OJ, won his case, because there was not enough evidence to prove, or in the jury's mind, it has to be beyond a reasonable doubt that he did it. And in that case, the jury decided it was, the weight of the evidence was not enough to, there was still doubt in their minds that he possibly maybe, couldn't have committed the crime. So then you're still innocent, even though, I would say most of the population believes he's guilty. So I think it's interesting, and it makes sense in the legal system we have why you have this, because the less you say, probably the better. You probably should say less because you don't want to self-incriminate yourself, even if you haven't done anything wrong, especially if you haven't done anything wrong. The next statement, nor be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. Again, I think this one is probably just as important as that last statement, because it's setting up this safeguard for the American citizen that in no way, shape, or form can the government come in and deprive you of what you have, your life, your freedom, your property. They can't take that away without going through the due process of law, going through the legal system that's been put in place. So I think that's something that's extremely important, and a lot of other countries don't have that. You don't have that right. A lot of countries, you could just be taken away and thrown in a cell and rot away there without any process of law. So I think that's absolutely critical, and it's something that's pretty, I would say, fairly unique to the United States compared to other countries. Last one, last kind of statement here. Nor shall private property be taken for public use without just compensation. So this is another one. This was actually one that I thought back to I think it was a news article I had read about a year ago. And in this news article, there was a veteran. I think he fought in Afghanistan, and he was, I think, going to buy something, like pretty large. I think it was maybe a car, and so he had like 60 grand in his trunk, and not all the money was for the car, but he didn't trust banks, right? He had, which, I mean, should you? I don't know. Um, but anyways, he was carrying around this cash in his trunk. He got pulled over by the state police. State police were like, "Do you have anything in the car?" He explained to him he had the 60 grand in cash because he's like, it might look a little suspicious, blah blah blah. And they're like, "Oh, do you mind if we take a look?" He let them take a look. And his first mistake, he probably shouldn't have told them about it because legally they're not allowed to look because it's not like they had a warrant or anything or reasonable cause to search his vehicle. This kind of goes back to what we were talking about last week, with searching a private property, um, and then they actually seized his $60,000 in savings, and it was like all his basically most of his money at the time. And he's like, this is how like I feed my kids, blah blah. They took the money, and he had to go through the legal courts to get his money back, and it was like a 6 month process. And so, I mean, and I think the courts, found the state police absolutely guilty for this because, like it says right here, nor shall property be taken for public use without just compensation. In this case, I mean, it kind of was being taken for public use when you think about it. I mean, it could have been just held, but they were taking private property from this man in a very unreasonable, illegal way, and it's just it's crazy to see kind of this power trip that a lot of people go through. It's like, I don't know. It just made me think back to that. But again, this clause should protect against that because there's no reason that unless they have, if they've gone through the due process of law, there's no reason that they should be able to seize private property. So that's kind of a example I could think of for this. But yeah, that's the Fifth Amendment. I plead the Fifth. I think it's important that we have it. And yeah, do you guys have anything to add?
I mean, that was a really good explanation from me. I like how you broke it down into each, I guess, phrase, clause. Yeah, just thinking about in school we did our stats class, and we're talking about the amount of people brought into a court versus how many are guilty and innocent.
Mm.
And if you break it down, it shows that the law of averages, that's usually more innocent people in court than guilty people.
Mm-hmm.
So if you say that they start out that they're innocent, you're going to be right more of the time than if you start out as they're guilty.
Mm-hmm.
So it actually provides more security to people that way, as like an actual, I guess, mathematical
Yeah,
computation.
and I think it is a safeguard too against the government just locking people up and then never seeing through on the due process of law. Because I think saying that guilty until proven innocent is a great way to invite a lot of corruption into your system. So I think that's fantastic that we have the system that we do, and a lot of people criticize the legal system we have. And I'm not saying that there's definitely issues that happen. I mean, there's nothing's ever going to be perfect. And there's definitely a lot of people that are falsely convicted for crimes they didn't commit, and that should be fixed. 100%. Those people should be free. And there's several cases of very serious accusations, and people are committed for murders and stuff they didn't commit, and it's kind of crazy to see. But in general, I think that the system we have works pretty well, and it was set up in a very thoughtful manner. It just wasn't kind of thrown together. They're like, oh, we're gonna do this and this. No, I think the thing to realize is that our founding fathers came from a country which probably didn't have the best legal system, and it didn't favor the people. And so when they were thinking through a lot of these things, they wanted to figure out a system that gave the people the best opportunity, or kind of the most opportunity to be free. And I think one of the most important things is having a legal system that protects the people from government corruption, or corruption in general. And when you have a system that allows the government to just lock people up for no reason, like we see in China, they just kind of show up and take people away, I think it invites a lack of freedom. So I think it's interesting to see how this was structured, because it was structured. It wasn't, like I said, it wasn't thrown together. It was put together for a reason, the way it is. So
Right, because of the way they wrote the Constitution, it places the individual's freedom first and protects that rather than the government, because it's one person versus the government. So it's resources are not stacked in the person's favor.
Yeah,
So if you give them the freedoms that they need in order to stay free, and the government has to be the one held accountable, then that's another check to keep it from being corrupted or overbearing.
that's perfect. Yeah, that's a perfect explanation of that. That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, and we're lucky. We're lucky we've
Very.
got, but we're so lucky that we have it. Because just think of, I mean, just some of these little things, like these things that most people just don't even know about, to be quite honest. The little clauses like this that, without due process of law, or little stuff like that. Just think if we didn't have those simple little statements, those simple little rights that are, you know, instated to us, or given to us through, the different amendments of the Bill of Rights. And I just think, how many situations would we have where the government infringes upon our freedoms, if we didn't have that? How often would that happen, and where would we be at today? And there's a lot of things to be thankful for.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I listened to something by Robert Breedlove again this week, and he was talking about you can describe money as allocation of attention. So he was saying that everything done in the world is something intended to by someone. And he said that you could substitute supply and demand for desire and satisfaction. So the higher the desire is the higher the demand. When the supply meets that desire, people are satisfied and they don't worry about it anymore. After you have dinner, you're not worried about food for a while, and then you focus on other things to put your attention towards. So he's saying that there's so many things put into place with those desires and intentions. They said it simplifies a lot of the processes by putting a number on something, like this is worth so much money. So with that in mind, he was talking about how the government is supposed to be the protector of property as their sole purpose. He said if individuals had perfect security, then there would be no need for government. He said the need for government would be taken to zero because each person could not be taken from in any way, their life, their liberty, or their property. So if they had sole custody of everything they own, then there would be no need for government, because then the government is supposed to be a bigger player to protect against other big players. If those big players couldn't attack us, there wouldn't be a need for this big player on our side. So it's just really interesting to think about, because in relation to the amendments, These essentially were to put a lot of security on us so that we wouldn't need as much of a government to worry about us. Because when those freedoms are taken, the governments get way bigger because then they are doing stuff outside of their sole purpose. And that's why like the Chinese government is so gigantic. Why ours is getting way bigger than it should or was ever intended to be. And then you just see all the fallout from that because people aren't given the freedom that they need in order to live their best lives. Um, so I thought it was really interesting because in another interview I was listening to Michael Saylor and a guy named Tom Bilyeu. They're talking about Bitcoin. And one of the things they were talking about was top-down governmental structure. And Tom asked Michael, why is it that top-down always seems to happen and why is it that it always fails? And Michael was saying that, well, he said, because one person trying to decide the best thing for everybody at once isn't going to work. He said, for example, if one person got up in New York City and told 10 million people when they could use the bathroom, that would not work out at all. Like if you set a specific time for everyone to use the bathroom, there's not enough bathrooms for everyone.
No, not at all.
And then so everyone couldn't use the bathroom, they would be angry, and then everything would fall apart, you know? So something simple like you need to use the bathroom when you want to, it's a great thing, you know? Like that's an example of freedom. An extremely good form of freedom, you know? I'm glad we have it the way we do. But
yeah, I like to be able to take a shit when I need to.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, who wants to be told to do? Who wants to be told what hour, minute, or second you can do that? That would suck. Holding
It's
it
awful.
in.
I know, and that's what the Chinese tax or whatever that social system they have. So they give you like a credit card and allows you to go to the theater when on
Oh,
these days.
the like the credit score card thing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
So that's what happens. These
Mm-hmm.
few people up here say, well, you get this card and you can go do these things on these nights and days. So then those people don't have the ability to choose what's best for them. For example, let's say if like I'm just thinking about this. Let's say if you had a really terrible day, but you couldn't listen to music except on Tuesdays. So now you maybe like a song will help lift your mood and make you put yourself in a better state of mind. Well, the government said, no, you can't listen to that music unless you're on this day because they determined it to be so. Now this person's going to have a terrible week till next Tuesday because they couldn't use something to help them get out of something like this, you know, or like a medication, getting chicken broth for sickness, all these different things that are essential for the individual to decide what's best for them. Because since every person is different, every person has different needs. So you can't just make this overarching decision to enforce upon people thinking it's for their good, quote unquote.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I just was thinking about that a lot, especially with this Fifth Amendment and just how important it is that people have the right of freedom because it is a human natural right. It's not like America invented this.
No.
This has been around since the beginning of time, and we're the first ones that really focus on making sure it happens.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the beauty, or I think what our founding fathers recognized is that in order to have a society that works together, you have to allow the individuals to be autonomous completely. And it's through individuality and the coming togetherness, this sense of patriotism, that I think is what we were talking about earlier, that is lacking in the world today. Uh, you know, I think more than ever, we're less patriotic, and I think it's okay to want to be an individual, and it's critical that we have our own ideas, our own thoughts, our own autonomy to go make whatever decisions we want to, because that's how you that's I mean that's how you live, you make mistakes because you made a choice and you learn from it. And if somebody's telling you what to do, you're never going to learn. You're never going to be your own person, right? And so I think it's absolutely critical that each and every one of us has that ability. I was listening to actually I was listening so for the month of October, I decided that every day I was going to do something challenging, and I decided I got this idea. I should give Joe Rogan credit. He does something called Sober October with a couple of his comedian friends, and they always pick something difficult to do that they do every single day for the month of October. So I was like, that sounds like a great idea. It sounds like a good way to challenge myself. So I was like, what can I do every day that, is something that I struggle with or would be a challenge mentally and physically for me. So I decided I was going to run a 5K every day. So today I was running my 5K. It's fourth day of October, so it really sucked. And I was like, man, I really want to stop right now. But I didn't stop, and I kept running, and I switched from my music to I just looked up David Goggins because I was running and I didn't want to mess around with my phone. So I clicked the top thing and it was like somebody made like an inspirational, like I don't know what you call it. It was like 28-minute inspirational, took a bunch of clips from a bunch of different David Goggins things, put it all together into a motivational mix. So I was listening to this David Goggins thing and he says something that really stuck with me. He said, a lot of people ask me, what's the one thing I can do to be successful? And he says, I can't tell you how to be successful. You're your own person. All I can tell you to do is to push yourself and to figure it out yourself. Figure out what you suck at, figure out what your issue is, he said, and fix it. And I thought it was perfect because it recognizes the individual nature of who we are as human beings. There's not one thing, and this is the problem with a lot of these, the CCP and what the CCP is trying to do with the social credit score. Every person's an individual, and so the more we put out these blanket things that are meant to fix society, the more we're taking away from the individual person. And we have to recognize that each individual person has something a little bit different. There's something we each tick a little bit different, and if you try to use the same strategy to fix, you know, the flaw that each of us as human beings have, you know, as a government, it's just not going to work. And it should be left up to us, the person, to recognize, I'm not very good at that. I should probably work harder on that thing. Or, I want to do this today because I know it's going to make me a better person tomorrow. And that should be left up to the individual. And so I think I'm I'm excited that I live in a and that we live in a country where we can still do that because there's not too many of them left out there, and it seems that every day we get a little bit closer to having to scan our card to walk out our doors or something like that. I don't know, but I think we have a lot to be grateful for, and I know this week I'll be thinking a lot going into next week. I'll be thinking a lot about how I can, not only improve who I am as an individual, but how I can be a better countryman, a better patriot, a better friend, brother, um, and just a better person in general, a better neighbor, because I think that's how all of us will get better is by picking each other up and helping each other out. So,
Yeah, that's good, Aiden. Um, on Sunday I watched this movie called The Peanut Butter Falcon.
I think I've seen that one.
You have?
Yeah, it's been a while, but I've seen it. Yeah.
It's a modern day interpretation of Huckleberry Finn,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
and that was something where it was the camaraderie of being with somebody can change people's lives, like
Mm-hmm.
deciding to help somebody with that one decision can open the door for some of the greatest blessings in your life. And so maybe that can be in our minds is what opportunities do we have tomorrow where we can help somebody out?
Yeah.
Yeah. I can't say that attitude is prevalent today, but if it was, man, what a much better world it would be.
It'd be a sight. It'd be a sight to see. I'd love to see it. Well, that's all I got, guys. But yeah, you the listeners, hopefully you got something out of today's podcast. Um, Glad if you stuck all the way through this podcast, great. We'll be back next Friday with another podcast. But until then, be safe, be a good neighbor, but most importantly, be a good American. God bless you, and we'll see you next week.